I drive trucks through remote Alaska, and something terrorized me for 31 hours on a road that doesn't exist on any map. 18 years on the Dalton Highway, 8 years Army before that. I've seen everything the Arctic can throw at a man. But February 2019 broke something in me. It started with a shape in my mirror, keeping pace at 40 miles an hour through deep snow. Then breathing on my CB radio, slow, wet, deliberate, on a channel no one else was using. Then a handprint on my trailer door, 9 inches across, still warm. I should have turned around. Instead, I followed orange flagging tape down a maintenance road that led nowhere. My engine died in a clearing surrounded by trees stripped of bark 8 feet off the ground. And something circled my truck all night, screaming once. A sound like a woman being torn apart. At dawn, I found tracks stopping 6 feet from my window. It let me leave. Not everyone gets that choice. I've been trying to tell this story for 4 years now. Every time I sit down to write it out or record it, I get about halfway through and I stop. Not because I don't remember. I remember everything. That's the problem. I remember it too well, and putting it into words makes it real in a way that thinking about it doesn't. My name is Harlan Vickers. I'm 51 years old. I live in Anchorage now, work a desk job coordinating logistics for a freight company. 40 hours a week, climate-controlled office, coffee that's always the same temperature. It's boring, I hate it. But I haven't driven north of Wasilla in 4 years, and I don't intend to start again. I'm telling this now because of something I saw on the news last month. A trucker went missing on the Dalton Highway, somewhere between Coldfoot and Adigan Pass. They found his rig 3 days later, engine still running, door hanging open. No sign of the driver. The official report said, driver error, possible hypothermia and disorientation. I've heard that language before. I've read it in my own incident file. Before I tell you what happened to me in February of 2019, you need to understand who I was then. Not because I think I'm special, but because you need to know I'm not the kind of person who makes things up. I'm not the kind of person who sees things that aren't there. I enlisted in the Army in 1990, right out of high school. I was 18 years old and didn't have a better plan. Spent 8 years as a mechanic, mostly stationed at Fort Richardson up here in Alaska. That's how I fell in love with this state. The size of it, the emptiness, the way it doesn't care whether you live or die. I got my honorable discharge in '98 when I was 26. By then I knew I didn't want to leave. I started driving trucks because it was the only job that let me stay in that emptiness. Long-haul freight, ice roads, routes that most drivers wouldn't touch. I was good at it. 18 years, without a major accident, without a load lost, without calling for rescue. I knew my rig like I knew my own body, a Kenworth W900, same truck for the last 9 years of my career. I knew what every sound meant, what every gauge should read, how she'd handle in 50 below with a full trailer. I'm telling you this because when I say something was wrong that night, I need you to understand the weight of that statement. I don't spook easy. I don't see shapes in the dark. I spent 2 decades in conditions that kill careless men, and I'm still here because I don't make mistakes and I don't let my imagination run. In February of 2019, I was 47 years old and 3 months behind on child support. I had 2 kids from my first marriage. My son was 19, my daughter 16. Their mother and I hadn't spoken civilly in years, but she made sure I knew exactly how much I owed and exactly what she thought of me for owing it. I'm not saying this for sympathy. I'm saying it because it explains why I took the run. Triple pay. That's what the mining company offered for a supply haul to their outpost past the Yukon River. 380 miles from Fairbanks, a route I'd driven at least 30 times before. The catch was the timing. Mid-February, during the worst cold snap interior Alaska had seen in years. -40 during the day. Probably -55, maybe 60 at night with the wind chill. Most drivers wouldn't touch it. I should have been one of them. But triple pay meant I could catch up on support, maybe have enough left over to send my daughter something for her birthday. It meant I could stop being the father who couldn't provide. Pride is a stupid thing to risk your life for, but I've never claimed to be smart about everything. I said yes. I filed my route plan with dispatch. And on February 9th, 2019, I loaded up my rig in Fairbanks and pointed it north into the dark. The night before I left, I spent 4 hours at the warehouse loading mining equipment and dry goods onto my trailer. Drilling parts, mostly. Replacement components for machinery that doesn't stop running just because it's cold enough to freeze diesel in the lines. Food supplies, too. Canned goods, dry rice, coffee. The kind of provisions that keep a remote crew alive when resupply runs are weeks apart. I checked everything twice. That was my routine, and I never skipped it. Not once in 18 years. Chains inspected and tightened. Fuel lines treated with anti-gel additive. Brake drums clear of ice. Battery connections clean. I topped off every fluid, tested every light, made sure my emergency kit was stocked. Flares, first aid, protein bars, water bottles I'd keep in the cab so they wouldn't freeze solid, space blanket, extra gloves. The .44 Magnum I kept under my seat, loaded with 6 rounds, 12 more in the center console. Some people think the gun is for protection against other people. It's not. It's for moose, mostly. A wounded moose can kill you faster than the cold. It's for bears, on the rare occasion you encounter one that isn't denned up for winter. It's for mercy if you hit something and it's suffering. And it's for yourself if everything goes wrong and you're looking at a slow death by hypothermia with no rescue coming. I'd never had to use it for any of those reasons. I carried it anyway. I filed my route plan with dispatch at 11 that night. Fairbanks to the mining outpost. 380 miles on the Dalton Highway and the access roads beyond. Estimated travel time, 14 hours, depending on conditions. Expected arrival, sometime in the late afternoon or early evening of February 10th. I gave them my satellite phone number, confirmed my CB channels, and told them I'd check in at Coldfoot, which was the last reliable contact point before the true emptiness of the northern route. I pulled out of Fairbanks at 4 in the morning, -42 on my dashboard thermometer. No wind, which was a small mercy. Wind is what really kills you up here. The darkness was absolute, the kind of black that swallows your headlights 20 feet in front of you. I'd driven in it 100 times before. It didn't bother me. The first 100 miles were what I expected. Empty road, empty country. The Dalton Highway is like that. 414 miles of gravel and ice connecting Fairbanks to the oil fields at Prudhoe Bay. In summer, you might see other trucks, a few tourists who don't know what they're getting into. In February, in a cold snap, you see no one. You are alone in a way that most people never experience. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference. I passed the last cell service around mile 56. After that, it was just me and the satellite phone and the CB radio. I settled into the rhythm of the drive, watching the road, checking my mirrors, monitoring my gauges. The heater worked fine. The engine ran smooth. I had coffee in my thermos and an audiobook playing low on my phone. Some thriller I don't even remember the title of now. Everything was normal. I crossed the Yukon River around 7:30. The bridge there always makes me hold my breath a little, even after all those crossings. It's the only way across for hundreds of miles in either direction. And in winter, the river below is a frozen white scar cutting through black spruce forest. If something goes wrong on that bridge, there's no backup plan. Nothing went wrong. I made it across, kept driving north. The sun came up around 9, What passes for sunrise in February, Alaska, anyway? A gray glow on the horizon that never quite becomes daylight. Enough to see by, but only just. I was past Finger Mountain, somewhere around mile 98, when I first noticed something in my side mirror. A shape moving through the trees, parallel to the road, keeping pace with my truck. I didn't think much of it at first. Moose, figured. Maybe a caribou that had wandered south from the herds. Animals do strange things in extreme cold, and I'd seen plenty of wildlife on the Dalton over the years. But I watched it for a mile and a half, and it never fell behind. 40 miles an hour through deep snow and thick spruce, smooth and steady, like it wasn't even trying hard. Then it cut sharply into the trees and vanished. I told myself it was nothing. I turned up the heater, checked my speed, and kept driving, but I watched my mirrors more carefully after that. I've thought about that shape in my mirror more times than I can count. 4 years of thinking, and I still can't tell you exactly what I saw. What I can tell you is what I know it wasn't. It wasn't a moose. I've seen hundreds of moose in my years on the Dalton, probably thousands. They're big, they're fast when they want to be, but they don't move like that. A moose runs with this lumbering gait, head swinging, legs churning through snow. What I saw in my mirror was smooth, fluid, like it was gliding between the trees instead of pushing through them. I was past Finger Mountain, somewhere around mile 98. The road there runs through black spruce forest, the trees packed tight on both sides, snow piled deep between the trunks. I caught it in my driver's side mirror first, just a flicker of movement, dark against white. I figured it was nothing. A shadow from the clouds, maybe. The light up there plays tricks on you, especially in February when the sun barely clears the horizon. But I kept watching, the way you do when something catches your eye and won't let go, and the shape was still there. Moving parallel to my truck, maybe 30 yards into the tree line, keeping pace. I was doing 40 miles per hour, the speed limit on that stretch, as much as there is one. And this thing, whatever it was, stayed with me. Not falling behind, not pulling ahead, matching my speed exactly, like it was watching me the same way I was watching it. I told myself it had to be a moose, maybe a caribou, something spooked by my engine noise, running alongside until it felt safe enough to cut away. That's what animals do. They run parallel until they find an opening. Then they break for deeper cover. But it didn't break. Not for a mile. Not for a mile and a half. I started paying closer attention, trying to make out details through the mirror and the trees. It was tall, that much I could tell. Tall and dark, moving on 2 legs. Not 4, 2. I remember the moment that registered, the way my hands tightened on the wheel without me telling them to. Then, at about the mile and a half mark, it cut sharply into the forest. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, swallowed by the spruce like it had never existed. No gradual fade into the distance, no stumbling through deep snow, just gone. I sat there for a long moment, eyes flicking between the road and my mirrors. The forest was empty. The road was empty. Nothing but white snow and black trees and gray sky stretching out in every direction. I picked up my CB and keyed the mic. Coldfoot Station, this is northbound Kenworth out of Fairbanks, you copy? Static. Then a voice, broken up but readable. Coldfoot here. Go ahead, northbound. Yeah, I'm about mile 98, just past Finger Mountain. You got any other traffic logged on the highway this morning? Anyone else heading north or south? A pause. More static. Negative, northbound. You're the only traffic we've got logged between Fairbanks and Wiseman. Road's empty today. Everything okay out there? I thought about telling them what I'd seen. I thought about saying there's something in the trees, something keeping pace with my truck, something that runs on 2 legs. But how do you say that without sounding crazy? How do you explain something you can't explain to yourself? Yeah, I said. Everything's fine, just checking. Coldfoot, out. I hung up the mic and turned up the heater. The cab was already warm, but I needed something to do with my hands, something normal. I told myself I'd imagined it. Fatigue, maybe. I'd been awake since 3 in the morning, on the road since 4. The mind plays tricks when you're tired and alone and staring at an endless white landscape. That's what I told myself. But I checked my mirrors more often after that. Every few seconds instead of every few minutes. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I didn't want to look too closely, I knew I hadn't imagined anything. I knew what I'd seen was real. I just didn't know what it meant yet. About an hour north of Finger Mountain, my CB radio did something it had never done before in 20 years of driving. The Dalton Highway doesn't have cell service past mile 56. No towers, no signal, nothing. Once you're out there, your only connection to the rest of the world is satellite phone, if you can get a signal, and CB radio. Channel 19 is the trucker's channel, the one everyone monitors. You use it to check road conditions, warn other drivers about hazards, call for help if you need it. In 18 years on that highway, I'd heard every kind of transmission you can imagine. Routine check-ins, emergency calls, bored drivers just wanting someone to talk to. I'd heard interference too, atmospheric noise, bleed over from other channels, the occasional burst of static that sounds almost like a voice but isn't. What came through my speaker that morning was none of those things. It started as a click, the sound of someone keying a microphone, that little pop of static you hear when a transmission begins. I waited for a voice to follow, the way it always does. Breaker 19, or northbound traffic, or something. Anything. Instead, I heard breathing. Slow, rhythmic, wet, like something with very large lungs drawing air in and pushing it out, close enough to a microphone to be picked up clearly. Not wind, noise. I know what wind sounds like on a CB, not interference. I've heard every kind of interference the Dalton can throw at you. This was something breathing, something alive. I keyed my own mic. Breaker 19, this is northbound Kenworth. Who's on this channel? The breathing continued. No response, no change in rhythm. Just that slow, steady inhalation and exhalation. Like whatever was making it didn't care that I'd spoken. Like it was just listening. Coldfoot Station, you reading this? Someone's transmitting on 19. I can't make out who. No response from Coldfoot either. Just the breathing, filling my cab, coming through my speakers like it was sitting right next to me. I've thought about this a lot in the years since. CB radios work on specific frequencies. To transmit, you need a radio. You need power. You need to be within range. There's no cell service out there, no radio towers, nothing. The only way someone could have been transmitting on channel 19 is if they had a CB unit and were close enough for my antenna to pick them up. But there was no one else on the road. Coldfoot had confirmed that. I was alone out there, the only traffic logged between Fairbanks and Wiseman. So what was breathing into a radio? The transmission lasted nearly 3 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard, counting the seconds, waiting for it to stop. At 2 minutes and 47 seconds, it cut out, just ended, mid-breath, like someone had switched off the power. I sat there in the silence that followed, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel, not from cold. The cab was warm. I was shaking because something primitive in my brain, something older than language, was telling me that what I'd just heard wasn't natural, wasn't normal, wasn't anything I could explain with weather or interference or equipment malfunction. I pushed the truck harder after that. 60 miles per hour on ice, faster than I should have been going, faster than was safe. I didn't care. I wanted to reach Coldfoot. I wanted to see other people, hear other voices, stand in a building with walls and lights and coffee that someone else had made. I wanted to feel like a human being in a human world, not like something small and alone being watched from the trees. I kept the CB on, but I turned the volume down. I didn't want to hear it again. Whatever it was, whoever or whatever had been listening. I still don't know what made that sound. I never will. But I know one thing. Something out there had a radio. Something out there knew how to use it. And it wanted me to know it was there. I pulled into Coldfoot around 9 in the morning, and I've never been so glad to see a truck stop in my life. Coldfoot isn't much. A cluster of buildings, a fuel station, a small camp that serves the truckers and pipeline workers who pass through. In summer, it gets tourists heading up to the Arctic Circle. In February, in a cold snap like the one we were having, it's just a handful of buildings huddled against the emptiness. But it was people. It was civilization. It was something other than that endless white road and whatever had been pacing me through the trees. I topped off my tanks first. Diesel was cold but flowing, and I let the pump run while I walked inside to pay and grab coffee. The place was nearly empty. Just me and a fuel attendant behind the counter, a native Alaskan man, maybe 50 or 55. Koyukon, if I had to guess from the region, though I never asked. He had the look of someone who'd spent his whole life in this country, the kind of weathered calm that comes from knowing exactly how small you are against the land. I paid for my fuel and made small talk, asked about road conditions further north, whether anyone had reported problems. He answered in short sentences, polite but clipped. Said the road was clear as far as he knew. Said the cold was supposed to hold for another few days. Normal stuff. But when I mentioned I was heading past the Yukon, up toward the mining outpost, something changed in his face. Not much, just a flicker, a tightening around the eyes. He looked away from me, started straightening things on the counter that didn't need straightening. "You be careful up there," he said. Nothing else. Didn't explain what he meant, didn't look at me when he said it. I wanted to ask him what he knew. I wanted to tell him about the shape in my mirror, the breathing on the radio. But how do you start that conversation with a stranger? I just nodded, took my coffee, and walked back outside. That's when I found it. I always check my load straps and trailer chains when I stop. It's habit, drilled into me over 18 years. You don't skip it, not ever, because the one time you do is the time something comes loose and kills someone. So I walked back along the trailer, checking the straps, checking the chains, making sure everything was secure for the next leg of the run. The handprint was on the rear door, right in the center, pressed into the frost that had built up on the metal overnight. I stood there staring at it, coffee cooling in my grip, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was huge, at least 9 inches across the palm, maybe more. 5 fingers and a thumb, positioned just like a human hand. But no human has a hand that size. No human I've ever met. The frost around the edges had melted slightly, which meant whatever had made it was warm. Warm and recent. Maybe while I was inside paying. Maybe while I was standing at the counter 20 feet away, making small talk about road conditions. I looked around the parking lot. Empty. Looked at the tree line beyond the buildings. Nothing moved. The only sound was the wind and the hum of the fuel pumps. I should have turned around right then. I should have gone inside, told the attendant what I'd found, called dispatch, and told them I was aborting the run. That's what a smart man would have done. But I wasn't smart. I was 3 months behind on child support, and the mining company was paying triple, and my pride wouldn't let me go back to Fairbanks and admit I'd been scared off by a handprint in the frost. I climbed back in the cab. I put the truck in gear, and I headed north. 20 miles past Coldfoot, Whatever had been watching me decided to stop watching. The first rock hit my passenger door with a sound like a gunshot. I actually flinched, thought for a second that someone was shooting at me. But there was no one out there. No other vehicles, no buildings, nothing but the road and the forest and the endless white. Then the second rock hit the roof, hard enough to dent the metal. I heard it roll off and fall into the snow beside the truck. The third one took out my passenger mirror, shattered it completely, sprayed glass across the window like someone had thrown a baseball through it. I was doing 50 on a straight stretch of highway. No overpasses, no cliff faces, no rock cuts or embankments that could explain where these things were coming from. Just flat road through flat forest, and rocks hitting my truck from angles that didn't make any sense. I did what any trucker would do. I gunned it. Pushed the rig up to 65, which is way too fast for ice, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of that stretch of road, away from whatever was throwing things at me. The rocks stopped after about a quarter mile. Just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. I kept my speed up for another mile before I let myself slow down, before I let myself check my mirrors. That's when I saw it. Something was standing at the tree line, maybe 300 yards behind me. Tall, taller than any man I've ever seen. Upright. Dark against the snow. Not a bear. Bears don't stand like that. Bears don't stand that still. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me drive away. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road and my foot on the gas, and I told myself I hadn't seen what I'd just seen. Told myself it was a tree stump, a shadow, anything but what it looked like. But I knew. Somewhere deep in my gut, I knew. Something was out there. Something that could throw rocks hard enough to dent steel, fast enough to hit a moving truck. Something that had been following me since Finger Mountain, maybe longer. And whatever it wasn't afraid of me. I should have turned around. Even then, even after the handprint, I should have turned around. But the road ahead was clear, and Coldfoot was behind me. And I told myself the worst was over. I told myself that whatever had thrown those rocks was gone now, that I'd outrun it, that the rest of the drive would be normal. I was wrong about all of it. 40 minutes after the rock stopped, I came around a bend and slammed my brakes so hard the trailer nearly jackknifed behind me. There was a tree across the road, a spruce, at least 60 feet long, trunk maybe 2 feet thick at the base. It lay across both lanes like a barricade, branches splayed out into the snow on either side. There was no way around it, no way through it. The road was completely blocked. I sat in my cab for a long moment, engine idling, staring at that tree. In 18 years of driving the Dalton, I'd seen plenty of deadfall. Wind brings trees down all the time up here, especially in winter when the ground is frozen and the roots can't hold. But wind damage looks a certain way. The break point is jagged, splintered, torn. You can see where the wood gave way under pressure. This wasn't like that. The break point on this tree was clean, almost smooth. And the trunk wasn't just broken, it was twisted. Like something had grabbed it and wrenched it sideways until it snapped. I'd never seen anything like it. I didn't know what could do that to a tree that size. I didn't want to know. I reached under my seat and pulled out the .44 Magnum. Checked the cylinder, 6 rounds, all loaded. I had 12 more in the center console. I put the gun on my lap and sat there, scanning the tree line on both sides of the road. Nothing moved. The forest was silent. Not quiet, silent. No birds, no wind, no creak of branches. Just that absolute stillness that makes your ears ring, that makes you hear your own heartbeat louder than it should be. I keyed my CB. Coldfoot Station. This is northbound Kenworth. You copy? Static. Duty dispatch. This is northbound Kenworth on the Dalton, mile approximately 120. I've got a tree across the road requesting assistance. more static, no response. I sat there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, trying to figure out what to do. I had a winch on my rig. I could chain up to the tree and try to drag it off the road, but that would mean getting out of the cab. That would mean standing in the open, back turned to the forest, while I hooked up the chains. I was working up the nerve to do exactly that when I noticed the flagging tape. It was tied to a branch on my left, about 20 feet down a narrow gap in the trees. Bright orange, the kind Dot uses to mark detours and alternate routes. It fluttered slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel from inside the cab. I stared at it for a long time. Flagging tape meant someone official had been here. Meant there was another way around. A maintenance road or service route that would let me bypass the blockage. That's what flagging tape means. That's what it's always meant, in 18 years of driving. But I hadn't passed any DOT crews on my way up. Hadn't seen any equipment, any vehicles, any sign that anyone was working this stretch of highway. And the tree was fresh. The exposed wood at the breakpoint was still pale, not weathered, not gray. Whatever had brought it down had done it recently. Maybe that morning. Maybe while I was standing at Coldfoot drinking coffee and staring at a handprint I couldn't explain. I should have waited. Should have sat in my cab until someone came along, another trucker or a DOT patrol. Should have stayed on the main road no matter how long it took. But no one else was on the highway. Coldfoot had told me that. And the mining company was expecting me. And I was already behind schedule. And that orange tape was right there, pointing down a road that had to lead somewhere. I put the truck in gear and turned off the highway. The maintenance road was narrow, barely wide enough for my rig. Snow packed deep on both sides, branches scraping against my mirrors as I eased through. My GPS showed nothing, just blank green wilderness, no roads marked, no landmarks. I told myself that didn't mean anything. Maintenance roads don't always show up on civilian GPS. That's normal, but nothing about this felt normal. And with every mile I drove, the trees pressed closer, and the silence grew heavier, and something in my gut kept telling me to turn around. I didn't listen. I kept driving. 12 miles in, the road ended. The clearing was maybe 100 feet across, roughly circular, surrounded on all sides by black spruce. The road just stopped at its edge, like whoever had made it had gotten this far and decided not to go any further. I pulled the truck to a stop and sat there, engine running, trying to understand what I was looking at. The first thing I noticed was the trees. The spruce at the edge of the clearing had been stripped of bark in long vertical gouges, pale wood showing through like wounds. The marks were high, some of them 8 feet off the ground, higher than I could reach even if I stood on the running board of my cab. They weren't random either. They followed patterns, clusters of 3 or 4 gouges in a row, evenly spaced, like something had been marking the trees, like something had been leaving signs. I checked my instruments. Temperature gauge read -47, fuel at just under half a tank, enough to get back to the highway if I left now, but not much margin for error. The sun was already going down, what little sun there was. In another hour, it would be full dark. I put the truck in reverse and eased off the brake. The engine sputtered, coughed, died. I sat there in the sudden silence, not understanding what had just happened. The Kenworth had never failed me, not once in 18 years. I'd driven it through conditions that would kill most vehicles, and it had never let me down. I turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click from the starter. I tried again. Same thing. The dashboard lights were on, the battery was fine, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Wouldn't even try. I popped the hood release and sat there for a moment, weighing my options. Getting out of the cab meant exposing myself. Meant standing in that clearing with my back to the trees while I looked at an engine I already knew wasn't going to show me anything useful. But Staying in the cab meant waiting for help that might not come, on a road that didn't exist on any map, 12 miles from the highway with no radio contact and no way to call for rescue. I grabbed the Magnum and stepped out into the cold. It hit me like a wall. -47 doesn't feel like weather. It feels like malice, like the air itself is trying to kill you. I pulled my hood up, tucked my face into my collar, and walked to the front of the truck. The engine looked fine. I checked everything I knew to check. Fuel lines, battery connections, alternator, belts. Nothing was frozen, nothing was loose, nothing was obviously wrong. Everything looked exactly the way it should look in a truck that was running perfectly. But the truck wasn't running, and I couldn't make it run. I stood there in that clearing, surrounded by those gouged trees, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Fear. Real fear, the kind that starts in your stomach and works its way up into your throat. The kind that makes you want to run even when there's nowhere to run to. The sun was going down. The temperature was dropping. And I was stranded in a place that shouldn't exist, with no explanation and no way out. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and chambered around in the 44. Then I waited for dark. I sat in that clearing for maybe 5 minutes, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. The engine had stalled, that's all. Engines stall. It happens. Even the best trucks have bad days. I turned the key again. Nothing. Not even the starter trying to engage. Just silence. I tried a third time. A fourth. Same result every time. Dashboard lights on, gauges reading normal, but the engine dead as if someone had pulled the battery cables. Except I'd just checked the battery cables. They were fine. The rational part of my brain started running through possibilities. Fuel pump failure. Starter motor gone bad. Some electrical gremlin that had finally decided to show itself after 18 years of perfect service. These things happen. They happen to everyone eventually. But that rational part was getting quieter by the minute, because I was sitting in a clearing that shouldn't exist, at the end of a road that wasn't on any map, surrounded by trees that had been gouged by something I couldn't explain. And my truck, the truck that had never failed me, not once in nearly 2 decades, had chosen this exact moment to die. I pulled out my satellite phone and tried to get a signal. The screen showed 1 bar, flickering in and out. I dialed dispatch in Fairbanks and got nothing but static. Tried again. Same thing. The phone was working, technically, but the signal wasn't strong enough to connect. I was alone. Really alone. 12 miles from the highway, with no engine, no radio contact, and no way to call for help. The temperature outside was -47 and dropping. The sun, what passed for sun in February, Alaska, was already going down, that gray light fading toward the horizon. I did the math in my head, the way any trucker learns to do when things go wrong. My auxiliary heater ran off its own fuel supply, independent of the main engine. If it worked, and that was a big if, given how nothing else seemed to be working. I had maybe 10 hours of heat, enough to get through the night, assuming nothing else went wrong. After that, I'd have to make a decision. Walk out in the dark and the cold, or wait for daylight and hope someone came looking for me. Neither option was good, but I'd been in bad situations before. I'd survived worse than this. At least, that's what I told myself. I locked the doors, checked the windows, made sure they were sealed tight. The cab of a Kenworth is built for this kind of cold. Insulated walls, double-paned glass, seals designed to keep the weather out. As long as the heater worked, I'd be okay. Uncomfortable, but okay. I reached under my seat and pulled out the .44 Magnum. Opened the cylinder, checked the rounds, 6 in the gun, 12 more in the console, 18 shots total. I didn't know what I thought I was going to shoot, but holding that gun made me feel better. made me feel like I had some control over what was happening. I chambered around and set the gun on my lap. Then I turned off the dome light, settled back in my seat, and watched the darkness gather outside my windows. The clearing was quiet. The forest was quiet. The whole world was quiet. That absolute Arctic silence that presses against your ears like a physical weight. No wind, no animals, nothing. I sat there as the last of the light faded, as the temperature dropped from bad to worse, as the stars came out above the spruce trees. I sat there with my hand on my gun and my eyes on the tree line, waiting for something I couldn't name. Around 8 o'clock, I heard the first footstep. The sound came from my left, somewhere in the trees at the edge of the clearing. A single footstep, heavy and deliberate. The crunch of snow compacting under something with real weight behind it. I stopped breathing, sat perfectly still, eyes straining against the darkness, trying to see what had made that sound. The residual glow from my headlights, I'd left them on to preserve some visibility, reached maybe 30 feet before it dissolved into black. Beyond that, nothing. Just the shapes of trees against a slightly lighter sky. Another footstep, then another. Slow and measured, like something walking a perimeter, testing the boundaries. I thought about turning on my dome light, getting a better look at whatever was out there. Then I thought better of it. The light would help me see, but it would also make me visible. Right now, I was just a dark shape inside a dark cab. If I lit myself up, I'd be a target. The footsteps continued. I tracked them by sound, moving from my left side around toward the rear of the truck. Heavy, rhythmic, patient. Whatever was out there, it wasn't in a hurry. It was taking its time, circling the truck like a predator sizing up prey. I've heard people talk about the fight or flight response, that rush of adrenaline that's supposed to kick in when you're in danger. What they don't tell you is that sometimes neither option is available. Sometimes all you can do is freeze. Sit there in the dark with your heart pounding and your mouth dry, waiting to see what happens next. That's what I did. I sat there with the .44 in my hand, finger on the trigger guard, and I listened. The footsteps reached the back of my trailer, paused. Then something hit the trailer wall, not a rock this time, but an open-palmed slap that shook the entire rig. The sound was enormous in the silence, a boom that echoed off the trees and faded into nothing. I flinched so hard I nearly pulled the trigger. My hand was shaking. My whole body was shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. Another slap, harder than the first. The trailer rocked on its suspension. Then the footsteps resumed, continuing around toward my passenger side. This went on for an hour, maybe longer. I lost track of time somewhere in there, lost track of everything except the sound of those footsteps and the occasional impact against my truck. Twice more, something slapped the trailer. Once, something struck the cab itself, right behind my head, hard enough to dent the metal. I didn't move, didn't turn on any lights, didn't try to look. I just sat there in the dark, gun in my lap, and waited. Then, around 9:30, the circling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. At least with the footsteps, I knew where it was. Now I knew nothing. It could be anywhere. Right outside my door, 10 feet away, gone entirely. I had no way to tell. I was straining my ears, trying to pick up any sound at all, when the scream came. I've heard a lot of things in my years in the wilderness. Elk bugling in the fall, wolves howling at night, lynx shrieking during mating season. A sound that's been known to make grown men reach for their guns. This was none of those. This was something else entirely. High-pitched and agonized, like a woman being torn apart. Loud enough to rattle my windows, loud enough to feel in my chest. It came from somewhere close, maybe 50 feet away, maybe less, and it lasted for 5 or 6 seconds before cutting off abruptly. Then silence again. Complete and absolute. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I even blinked. I watched the sky for hours, waiting for light. Time moves different when you're afraid. Minutes stretch into hours, hours into eternities. I kept checking my watch, convinced that dawn must be close, and every time the numbers told me I was wrong. 11 o'clock? Midnight? 2 in the morning? The darkness just kept going. The auxiliary heater held, thank God. The temperature inside the cab hovered around 40 degrees, cold enough to see my breath, but warm enough to keep me alive. Outside, my dashboard thermometer read -52, cold enough to kill exposed skin in minutes, cold enough to turn this cab into a coffin if the heater failed. Nothing came back after the scream. No more footsteps, no more slaps against the trailer, no more sounds of any kind. Just that crushing silence, pressing in from all sides. I don't know if that made it better or worse. At least when I could hear it moving, I knew where it was. The first hint of light came around 8:30, a faint gray glow on the eastern horizon, barely visible through the spruce. I watched it grow brighter by degrees, the slowest sunrise I've ever witnessed. By 9 o'clock, I could make out shapes. By 9:30, I could see the clearing. I sat there for another 15 minutes, scanning the tree line, looking for movement. Nothing. The forest was still. The snow was undisturbed except for the tracks. I saw them through my driver's side window, a line of impressions in the snow leading from the trees toward my cab. They hadn't been there when I'd checked the engine yesterday. They'd been made during the night, while I sat in the dark listening to something circle my truck. I didn't want to open that door. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay inside, stay hidden, stay safe behind the glass and steel. But I needed to see. I needed to know what had been out there with me. I grabbed the Magnum, checked the cylinder one more time, and stepped out into the cold. The air hit me like a physical blow. -50 feels like being stabbed with ice picks, like your lungs are filling with broken glass. I pulled my hood tight, tucked my face into my collar, and forced myself to walk around the front of the truck. The tracks were enormous, 18 inches long, maybe 19. Bipedal, 2 feet, not 4, walking upright like a man. But no man has feet that size. No man has a stride that length either. I measured it later, pacing it out, nearly 5 feet between steps. Whatever had made these tracks was tall, 7 feet at least, probably more. The trail led from the tree line directly to my cab, following a straight path through the snow, and it stopped 6 feet from my driver's door. Just stopped, like whatever had been walking had reached that point and stood there, watching. I looked at the snow where the tracks ended. The impressions were deep, pressed down hard, like something heavy had stood in that spot for a long time. Long enough to pack the snow solid. Long enough to watch me through the glass while I sat in the dark, clutching my gun, trying not to breathe. It had been right there. Close enough to touch the door if it wanted. Close enough to break through the window. Tear me out of that cab. Do whatever it wanted to do. But it hadn't. It had just stood there, watching, and then it had walked away. I found other signs as I circled the truck. Broken branches at head height, snapped clean off. Tufts of coarse, dark hair caught in the bark of a spruce tree, maybe 8 feet up, and a smell, faint but unmistakable, even in that cold, like rotting meat mixed with wet dog. A thick, organic stench that didn't belong in that frozen landscape. I stood there in the clearing, surrounded by evidence I couldn't explain, and I made a decision. I was leaving the truck, I was walking out of here, back to the highway, back to civilization. Whatever was in these woods, I wasn't going to wait around for it to come back. I packed what I could carry: 2 bottles of water tucked inside my coat to keep them from freezing, a handful of protein bars, the emergency space blanket from my kit. The Magnum went in my right hand, 12 extra rounds in my pocket. I left everything else behind: the truck, the cargo, 18 years of my life sitting in that clearing. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was getting out. The maintenance road stretched ahead of me, narrow and white, winding back through the spruce toward the highway 12 miles away. 12 miles doesn't sound like much. In a truck, it's nothing. 15 minutes, maybe 20. On foot, in deep snow, in negative 50-degree cold, it's a different story entirely. I started walking around 10 in the morning. The sun was up, if you could call it that. A pale disk hanging low on the horizon, throwing long shadows across the snow. The light helped. At least I could see where I was going, see the road ahead, see the trees on either side. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean I could feel it, the same way you can feel someone staring at the back of your head in a crowded room. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck, that instinct that makes you want to turn around even when you know you shouldn't. I turned around anyway. Every few minutes I'd stop, spin around, scan the tree line behind me. Nothing. Just snow and spruce and silence. But the feeling never went away. Twice I heard branches snap somewhere in the forest. Not close, maybe 100 yards off, somewhere in the trees to my right. The sound of wood breaking under weight, sharp and sudden in the stillness. Both times I froze, raised the gun, waited. Both times, nothing showed itself. Whatever was out there, it was staying hidden, keeping its distance, watching. The walk took almost 5 hours. 5 hours of trudging through snow that came up past my knees in places. 5 hours of fighting the cold that wanted to crawl inside my clothes and freeze me solid. By the time I saw the highway ahead, that blessed strip of gravel and ice cutting through the wilderness, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the gun. My feet were numb. My face was numb. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, even inside my gloves. I stumbled out onto the road around 2 in the afternoon and just stood there, swaying, trying to remember how to breathe. A truck appeared maybe 15 minutes later. A pipeline maintenance vehicle, white with orange stripes coming from the north. I stepped into the road and waved my arms, and it slowed to a stop beside me. 3 men inside. They were wearing standard cold weather work gear, Carhartt coveralls, heavy boots, company patches on their shoulders. The driver rolled down his window and looked at me without surprise. That's the part I remember most clearly. He didn't look surprised to find a half-frozen trucker standing alone on the Dalton Highway in the middle of February. "You the Kenworth?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. I nodded, could barely speak through my chattering teeth. "Get in," he said. "We'll take you to Coldfoot." They gave me coffee from a thermos, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. The heater in their truck was running full blast, and I sat there in the back seat, thawing out, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "We need to radio this in," I managed. "My truck's still out there. There's something..." The driver exchanged a look with the man in the passenger seat, a look I didn't understand then, and still don't understand now. "Let's just get you warm first," he said. That was all he said. And they drove me to Coldfoot in silence. At Coldfoot, the pipeline crew dropped me at the truck stop and drove away without another word. No names exchanged, no paperwork, no offer to stick around and help me file a report. They just left me standing in the parking lot with a blanket around my shoulders and coffee cooling in my hands. I went inside and asked to use the satellite phone. The same fuel attendant was working, the native Alaskan man who'd been there that morning. He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression, then pointed me toward the back office without asking any questions, like he already knew, like he'd been expecting me to come back. I called the Alaska State Troopers and filed a report over the phone, told them everything: the fallen tree, the detour, the unmarked road, the clearing, the tracks. The trooper on the other end took notes. I could hear him typing, hear the occasional pause when I said something that didn't fit whatever form he was filling out. He was polite, professional, and completely skeptical. I could hear it in his voice, the way his questions kept circling back to the same things. How long had I been awake? Had I been drinking? Was it possible I'd gotten disoriented in the cold, taken a wrong turn, imagined things that weren't there? I told him no. I told him I'd been driving that highway for 18 years, that I knew the difference between a wrong turn and a road that shouldn't exist, that I'd seen what I'd seen. He said they'd dispatch a recovery crew for my truck and thanked me for the report. 2 days later, the crew found my Kenworth right where I'd left it. The clearing was there. The road was there. Everything was exactly as I'd described. Except the flagging tape was gone. The orange tape that had led me off the highway, that had been tied to that branch as clear as day. Gone. No trace of it anywhere. The official incident report landed in my mailbox 3 weeks later. I still have it. Mechanical failure and driver disorientation due to extreme cold conditions. That's what it says. No mention of the tracks. No mention of the handprint on my trailer. No mention of the tree gouges or the fallen spruce or the road that wasn't on any map. I called the trooper back, asked him about the discrepancies. He said the recovery crew hadn't observed any unusual tracks in the area, said the snow had probably covered them, said these things happen. I asked about the pipeline maintenance crew, the 3 men who'd picked me up on the highway. Gave him the description of their truck, the company markings, everything I could remember. He said he'd look into it and call me back. He never did. I made my own calls after that. Tracked down the number for the pipeline company's regional supervisor, explained who I was and what had happened. Asked about the crew that had been operating on that stretch of the Dalton on February 10th. There was no crew, he told me. No maintenance work scheduled in that area that week. No vehicle matching the description I'd given. No record of anyone being dispatched to that section of highway at all. I asked him to check again. He said he already had. 3 men picked me up on that road. 3 men gave me coffee and blankets and drove me to Coldfoot in a company truck with company markings on the doors. They were real. I sat in their back seat. I felt the heat from their vents. But according to every official record, they don't exist. They were never there. And neither, apparently, was anything else I saw that night. That's when I started to understand that whatever had happened to me, no one was going to acknowledge it. No one was going to investigate. The official story was already written, and nothing I said was going to change it. In the weeks after I got back to Fairbanks, I became obsessed with finding answers. I couldn't let it go. Couldn't stop thinking about that clearing, those tracks, the scream that still echoed in my head every time I closed my eyes. I started making calls, sending emails, reaching out to anyone I thought might be able to help me make sense of what I'd experienced. Most of them went nowhere. Unanswered messages, polite brush-offs, people who clearly thought I was crazy and didn't want to say it to my face. But a few of them led somewhere. The first was a wildlife biologist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I found her name in an old research paper about large mammal populations in interior Alaska. I sent her an email with my story, attached a sketch I'd made of the handprint on my trailer, the dimensions, the finger placement, everything I could remember. She called me back 3 days later. Wouldn't put anything in writing, she said. Wouldn't go on record. But she wanted to talk. Her voice was careful, measured, She asked me to repeat the measurements. 9 inches across the palm, I told her. 5 fingers, thumb positioned like a human's. She was quiet for a long moment. Those dimensions are physiologically impossible for any known North American primate, she said finally. Impossible for any known primate, period. I asked her what that meant. What could have made a print like that? I can't help you officially, she said. And I'd suggest you stop asking questions, for your own sake. She hung up before I could ask anything else. The second lead was a search and rescue volunteer who'd worked the Dalton Highway corridor that winter. I got his name from a trucker friend who'd heard rumors, passed through channels I probably shouldn't have accessed. He agreed to talk to me on the condition that I never use his name, never record the conversation, never tell anyone where I'd gotten the information. We met at a diner in Fairbanks. He was older than I expected, maybe 60, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades working in the cold. He looked tired, not scared, tired, like a man who'd carried something heavy for too long. He told me I wasn't the only one. 3 other truckers had reported similar incidents on that same stretch of highway between January and March of 2019. Rocks thrown at their vehicles, strange sounds on their radios, the feeling of being watched, followed, hunted. None of them had filed official reports. None of them drove that route anymore. One of them, he said, had gone missing entirely. About 6 months after his incident, his truck was found off the road near Adigun Pass, engine still running, door hanging open. No sign of the driver, no tracks leading away. Nothing. They never found him. I asked the SAR volunteer what he thought had happened. What was out there on that highway, doing these things to people? He just shook his head and stared into his coffee. Some questions don't have answers, he said, and some answers are worse than not knowing. I quit trucking 3 months after that night. Took a job with a logistics company in Anchorage, coordinating freight schedules from behind a desk. The pay was worse. The work was boring. But I didn't have to drive north anymore, and that was worth more to me than money. My kids didn't understand at first. My son asked me once why I'd given up the job I'd done my whole life, the job I used to say I'd do until they carried me out of the cab. I told him I was getting too old for ice roads. He didn't believe me, but he didn't push. Neither did my daughter. They could see something had changed in me, even if they didn't know what. I caught up on my child support eventually. Took a while with the pay cut, but I got there. My ex-wife and I still don't talk much, but at least she stopped calling me a deadbeat. Small victories, I guess. 4 years have passed since February of 2019. 4 years of desk work and city life and nights spent in a warm apartment where nothing circles in the dark. I should be over it by now. I should have moved on, filed it away as one of those strange things that happened once and never will again. But I haven't. I can't. I still dream about that clearing, still hear that scream sometimes, cutting through the silence just as I'm falling asleep. Still see those tracks in the snow, leading from the tree line to my door, stopping 6 feet away like whatever made them had stood there all night, watching me through the glass. I think about that a lot. The watching. The patience of it. Whatever was out there, it could have broken through my window anytime it wanted. Could have torn that cab apart like tissue paper, dragged me out into the cold, done whatever it intended to do. It didn't. It just stood there and watched. Why? I don't know. I'll never know. And that's the part that keeps me awake at night. More than the fear, more than the memory of those footsteps circling in the dark. The not knowing. The realization that something out there made a choice about me, decided to let me go when it didn't have to. And I'll never understand why. I saw a news story last month about a trucker who went missing on the Dalton, found his rig near Adigun Pass, engine running, door open, No sign of the driver. The official report said driver error, hypothermia and disorientation. I know better. I thought about calling someone, the troopers, the SAR volunteer, anyone who might listen. But what would I say? What could I tell them that would make any difference? The official story is already written. It's always already written, and nothing I say is going to change what happens to the next driver who sees orange flagging tape where there shouldn't be any. So I'm telling this story instead, putting it out there for whoever wants to hear it. You can believe me or not. I don't care anymore. I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm just telling you what happened to me, what I saw, what I heard, what I felt standing in that clearing at dawn, surrounded by tracks that shouldn't exist, knowing that something had watched me all night and chosen not to kill me. If you ever drive the Dalton Highway in winter, and I hope you don't, but if you do, remember what I'm telling you. If you see flagging tape where there shouldn't be any, don't follow it. I don't care how official it looks. I don't care if there's a tree across the road and no other way around. Turn around. Take the delay. File the complaint. Do whatever you have to do, but don't follow that tape into the trees. Because something is out there. Something old and patient and smarter than we want to believe. And it's still waiting. I was lucky. It let me leave. Not everyone gets that choice.